Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on leading indicator forecasting. Maybe a short introduction. So Solventure Life is one of the business units of Solventure. So we have our SIOP or SIOP activities, which is focused on implementing sales, inventory, and operations planning in let's say production companies, where we combine the people, process, tools, and analytics. We are using there the Archiva software, so we do software implementations, and we also do what I would call software-based services. So people who are looking for temporary solutions, for instance, we also serve that type of needs in the SIOP market. We also recently launched our Solventure Academy. So in general, we see that a lot of companies are not necessarily needing a tool or a new process, but simply lack good knowledge of supply chain and basic supply chain processes. And we decided to come to that need or deliver the Academy solution for that need. So basically we will give open trainings in Europe, and we can also do in-company training. So if you would be looking for that, feel free to reach out to us. And then Solventure Life, leading indicator forecasting, which is focused on delivering advanced forecasting models. We will tell more about that today. Based on leading indicators, so how can we couple external data to our forecast, and the ultimate goal is, as it says, to improve the forecast accuracy of our customers. These are a couple of references, so you see that we're active in different types of industries. Also, when we look at leading indicator forecasting, the idea is really to come up with a solution that will be able to serve different industries. Today will be about promos. So clearly, if you are in food, consumer packaged goods, or we will call it today FMCG, you may be very promo intensive. Today we will talk specifically on how promotional activities and macroeconomic leading indicators, how those two go together. At later stages we will also discuss other types of information like weather information. So what's the idea of the leading indicator forecasting? Well, it's based on PhD research, which is now going into its 4th year. So myself, I have a PhD in multi-echelon inventory optimization. I'm also still linked to Ghent University and to the Vlerick Business School. So typically we have master theses in forecasting and inventory related topics. And it really started out like, okay, can we improve forecasting by using macroeconomic factors? So that's where it started, let's say 5 to 6 years ago. And well, macroeconomic factors do have an important effect in different industries. But we've also discovered that there's more than only macroeconomic factors. So today we will talk a lot in detail about promotions. Next webinar we will talk about weather information. When we've run cases, we've also noticed that sometimes there's events, like an event can be a change in import tariffs, or an event can be a change or an adoption of a new type of technology in a certain market, right? So these are events which also drastically influence your demand and your demand pattern. And from Solventure, we have a firm belief that the field of forecasting is about to change drastically. If we look at it from a software perspective, we believe that over the last 10 years, the competition was really on who has the best technique. But all of the traditional techniques available are simply extrapolation techniques. They will look at your recent history, and based on the recent history, they will extrapolate, let us say, the near future. And that domain is going to change, because instead of having the best technique, we believe in the future the battle will be about who has the best information and who has the best way to link that information to his or her sales data. So that's really what we strongly believe. That's also the reason why we have invested in the development of this type of solutions. So again, today we will talk about macroeconomic effects and promo effects, which certainly in a sector like FMCG or retail are very important. Next webinar we will talk about how to include weather information. But like last week, we were more in a process type of company. It's an industrial supplier of gases. They had done a Black Friday promo, so even in chemical and process, we see more promo type of events disturbing the demand patterns, and we truly believe that the future of forecasting will be about who has the best information and who has the capability to link that to its sales in a first step to explain the sales, and then in a second step also to be able to better shape the sales or to better shape the demand. So I'm not sure whether we will need a full hour. Most of the slides will be built around a specific example we have recently worked on. We will pause for questions near the end of the webinar, and we also then have one slide to just summarize what is our approach, how do we work with companies. If some of you would be interested to continue talking or to maybe do a kind of an exercise together, we will shortly explain how we typically work with companies. So let's introduce the example. So when we think about promos, well, we clearly more think about FMCG or retail type of companies, where we know that promos have a big effect, weather can have a big effect. Also calendar effects, and we will see later on what calendar effects mean. And so today we will talk about the promos, we will talk about the calendar effects. Next webinar we'll talk in more detail about weather effects. Yeah? And if we want to combine promos, calendar effects with macroeconomic trends or macroeconomic effects, yeah? What we will do is we first need to take off the promo and calendar variability to reveal the underlying macroeconomic effect or the underlying macroeconomic trend. Once we have identified the underlying macroeconomic trend, yeah, we will be able to extrapolate that into the future based on leading indicators. If we have extrapolated that into the future, we can put the promos back on, we can put the calendar effects back on. So that's the process which we will try to show in this webinar. Yeah. There's a second important aspect. When you talk about promos, you are typically talking about customer SKU level of data. You run promos for a specific customer on a specific SKU. When we talk about macroeconomic effects, typically we don't try to reveal that on a customer SKU level because that's too erratic. We look for macroeconomic trends more on an aggregated level, so let's say a product group or a product group region combination. So that's a second, let us say, thing we will need to explain is when we talk about promo filtering, calendar effect filtering, we will do that on the customer SKU level. We will need to aggregate that data to a product group level to reveal macroeconomic trends. We will make the macroeconomic forecast on the aggregated level. We will then break that back down to the customer SKU, and on that level we will add the promos and the calendar effects. That's what we will try to show in, let's say, the next 10 to 15 slides. Okay, so this is, I think, again, comparable. We look at seasonality, calendar seasonality. Calendar effect also means week in the month. In general, we see that in many countries the buying power decreases during the month. So the first week of the month is typically a better week with higher sales compared to the last week of the month, again, if you are in FMCG. Public holidays have a big effect, right? If in the US it would be the Super Bowl, if here in Europe it's things like Christmas or it's New Year. If it would be in China, it could be Chinese New Year. So holidays can have a major impact on your sales and on your sales pattern. So it's important also to take that into account next to promos. Yeah. When we talk about promos, you typically run different types of promos. You might run a promo in a specific period of the year in combination with a public holiday, yes or no. And if you run a promo or if you have a public holiday, typically you have a cannibalization, meaning that the first week before the promo and a couple of weeks after the promo, you may have lower sales because consumers will then wait to buy until you really, let's say, have the promo that has been announced earlier. So all of these effects Certainly in FMCG and in retail type of business, you know that they are there. Unfortunately, traditional techniques are very poor in dealing with them. So the techniques that we are using are basically regression type of techniques, which consider all of these calendar and promo events as external data, and using the regression models we can link them to the sales data. We can better explain the demand variability, and if you are able to better explain the historical demand variability, it will also help us to make a better forecast towards the future. That's the whole idea. So let's start with an example, customer SKU. So this is customer SKU, a specific customer, a specific SKU. Yeah? So the black is the original sales data. You clearly see a lot of big spikes, a lot of big peaks. Yeah? We will see later on that some of these big peaks are related to public holidays. Some of these big peaks are related to promos. And let's say step by step we will try to explain the variability in this sales pattern. And it's also clear if this is of course on a customer SKU level. Later on we will also show the aggregated data on a product group level. Yeah? If you are in an FMCG type of business, promos and calendar effects have a huge effect, right? They explain a big chunk of the variability in the demand. So if we want to reveal underlying macroeconomic patterns, we will need to remove that variability to really reveal the underlying macroeconomic trends. That's the whole idea of this webinar and this example we show here. So step by step we will try to explain stuff. We will start by just including trends. So if I would use a simple trend model, this is what I see. I see for this customer SKU, I see a declining trend, a negative trend. And next thing I might add, even if I use, let's say, traditional, for instance, whole winters, exponential smoothing type of forecasting methods, I try to add, for instance, monthly seasonality. So if this is the last month of the year, I think this is around Christmas, well, December might be a very good month for me. If I look over here, well, this might be March. Well, maybe the higher sales in March is coming back each year. It could be due to Easter. It could also be due at this stage to the fact that I run a promo in that period every year. Yeah? Traditional techniques are not able to make a difference between calendar effects and, let us say, a typically recurring promo. They just look for a recurring monthly or yearly pattern, and that's what they will then extrapolate into the future. So this is what happens if we add monthly seasonality. The next step is we add the week of the month. So we already explained that the first week of the month is typically a better week compared to the last week of the month. Yeah? So again, this is just monthly data, you could say, monthly periods. So you see that each month has a different level. If we add the week of the month, yeah, you already see that we are more peaking. There is more peaks in the demand pattern. So for instance, if I look over here, yeah, this is one of the peaks which already gets more close. Yeah? So at this stage, I see this in general, this is a better month. Yeah? If I also add that the first week of the month is typically better than the other weeks, I can see that I'm already doing a recently good job in predicting that specific peak. But I also see that there is a lot of other peaks which I'm not able to explain yet. So we continue our journey on how do we explain the demand variability. So what do we add? We add public holidays. So in this pattern we have added Christmas and we have added Easter. So this is the Christmas peak. So you see that the Christmas peak has a huge effect. It's coming back every year. So you see that these calendar effects or public day effects are very significant, and I need to be able to include them in my forecasting model if I want to be able to predict the peaks in a good way. So again, two peaks which are now explained even better, but we are still missing a lot of peaks. So you see here there are peaks here which we don't match. There is also still an amount of over forecasting if I look over here, right? So here the downward peaks are not predicted correctly. So we keep on adding stuff. So what do we do now? We have added promotions. So I'll show it again. This was basically just a trend month of the year, week in the month, and some public holidays. So that's what we've added so far. If we add the promos, we see that again we can let's say explain significantly more of the demand variability. So if I look at the pattern over here, so I said there was an amount of over forecasting. If I add for the promo effects, the over forecasting here in the downward peak is corrected quite well. Some of the peaks now seem to be explained, let's say, gradually better and better. So over here I have a good prediction of this peak. I'm still underestimating a bit over here. There are some other peaks which we don't really match yet. So if I look at this one, I still don't have explained this type of peak. I see that there's probably a promo over here, but I'm not able to explain that peak. So what else do we do? Well, in general, we also see that when we run a promo, let's say over 2 or 3 weeks, the first week of the promo has a different effect compared to the second week and the third week. So by adding the number of the promo week, so we are able to further, let us say, explain variance in the sales pattern. And what we've also added is like, okay, the week before and the week after the promo, we see a cannibalization because consumers will simply either postpone their purchase or they will buy more during the promo period and then buy less afterwards. So this is what we have added here, the week of the promo and then a cannibalization effect. So if we do this, if you now look at the peaks, it's clear that we really have explained a lot of the variability in that sales pattern, right? And so again, what did we add? We have added a trend. We have added the month of the year, which clearly has an effect. We have added the week of the month, which clearly has an effect. We have added a promo and actually the type of promo because you can have different types of promos. The week of the promo because we know the first week of the promo has higher or has a better effect compared to the last week of the promo. We have also added the cannibalization effect, and then we are able to match the demand variability in this type of way. If you see this, for me it's always, let us say, shocking to see how good you can predict the sales variability if you do it in this way. And if we turn that argument around, we need to ask ourselves, well, how can we ever make a good forecast for this type of sales pattern if we have not used this type of external information? If I have not used the month of the year, the week of the month, the week of the promo, cannibalization, if I don't add that type of information to my forecasting method, well, it should basically be clear that it's impossible to make a decent forecast for this type of variable demand item. So that's basically on an SKU. Some general stuff. If a promo always falls together with a calendar effect, so if we say, well, I have only 2 years of data and each year at Christmas I do a promo with a reduction of X%. Well, if these two are always falling together, it's impossible for statistics to make the difference between the two. So it's as in any other forecasting. If you have more history, typically you might have more situations where there is also an X% reduction promo, but it didn't occur at Christmas. That will allow the statistics to make a difference between the two effects. And more data and more history will help in making this type of models more accurate. But I think that's the same in any type of forecasting modeling exercise. What else can we have? New product customer combinations. That's certainly something which we had in this case, which we also expect in other cases, in other situations. So this is a customer which has started only recently. So you see that, okay, before basically the sales was 0 and we started selling over here. When I do, for instance, modeling of seasonality, well, I want to exclude, of course, the period where I didn't do any sales. When you do regression modeling, it's very easy to add this type of effects. Okay, so remember that we said the ultimate goal is to combine promos and calendar effects with macroeconomic effects. That's what we do. We said promos and calendar effects really play on the customer SKU level. So that's why we so far looked at the promos and the calendar effects on the customer SKU. if you look at macroeconomic effects, we don't want to look for macroeconomic effects on that same detailed level. For the macroeconomic effects, we want to look at the aggregated level. So for instance, we want to look at the product group level. So what we will now do is run this type of analysis on a customer SKU, aggregate it, and then let's see what happens if we aggregate that data. So this is aggregate data. So for a certain region, we aggregated all the customers and all the SKUs for a specific product group. So in this specific case, it's the type of beverages. So we have run first the analysis on the customer SKU. If we now aggregate it, what do we see? Well, some peaks we are matching very good. This is the Christmas peak. If you see by running the analysis on a customer SKU, for me it's amazing how well we explain this type of Christmas peak. If this is the type of forecast accuracy we can get, I assume all of us would be very happy. We also see that there are some peaks which we don't explain. So we miss a peak over here, we miss a peak over here, we miss one over here. So there's multiple peaks which are not yet explained. When you do this type of modeling, you need to do data cleaning, right? So most probably, that's typically our assumption, if you do this type of analysis, it could have been that you missed some of the promos on a lower level of detail. So that's also the type of analysis we typically run, like what did we miss here on a lower level of detail. How do you know whether you missed something, yes or no? Well, you can easily provide algorithms that kind of do outlier detection or promo detection, right? And how does that type of algorithm works? That's shortly described over here. What you basically say, well, I'll just go back and explain it to this. If I look at this sales pattern over here, so the pink line is my current forecast, and I will say, okay, if I compare the pink forecast to the black pattern, which is the historical sales, what if I would add to the pink model specific events or specific patterns which kind of help me to explain that peak? We will run statistical tests which will say, okay, well, by adding, for instance, a promo event at this specific point in time, statistics will help us to define whether that would give a significant difference, yes or no. That's what we explain here on this slide. If you run this type of modeling, what it will basically say is like, okay, you were missing a couple of peaks, and all of these peaks really are significant differences. So by modeling specific outliers there, it is really significant. It helps to significantly improve the sales pattern. So most probably you missed some of the promos here. This is still an analysis on the aggregated level. If we run the same on the customer SKU level, well, if we started looking into more detail in the customer SKUs, we found here that there was one customer SKU combination where we see this. You could say this is kind of the base sales, and here there are specific peaks in the sales. Well, these peaks are most probably promos, which you ran with that customer, or which that customer ran maybe even without telling you, right? But most probably these were promos, and you have not provided is with the data telling these were promos. So you need to clean your data by running this type of outlier detection to make sure that your promo history is complete. And if you complete your promo history, then you will notice that indeed these were promos. And if these were promos, and we again continue, then we are able to better predict or explain those peaks. So we might go through a couple of iterations where we say we start on a customer SKU level, we aggregate, we see if also on an aggregated level we explain sufficient of the variability in the demand pattern. If not all of the variability is explained on the aggregated level, we might need to go back to the customer SKU level to define where are the outliers, to understand what are the outliers, to correct the data at that lower level of detail, and in the end we then verify that we have explained sufficient of the aggregated variability. And again, this is the aggregated sales pattern. So you see that there is huge peaks in it, and this is the original sales pattern, and this is now the blue line is, let us say, the baseline sales. Yeah? The blue line is the baseline. It means it's what we keep as sales after removing trend on a customer SKU level, the month of the year, so the yearly seasonality, the week of the month, the promos, the week of the promo, cannibalization effects of the promo. So if we remove all of those promo and calendar effects, this is what we get as a result. This is the baseline sales. So you see that if you look at it on an aggregated level, there seems to be an increasing trend. If we remove all the promo and the calendar effects, yeah, we see that on average there is even a slightly declining. And so we are able to make a difference between the two. There's a slightly declining trend. We also see it's not simply a constant trend. So the orange boxes here are showing a smoothed baseline sales. Yeah? And you see that the sales is going up and down. Certainly over here, if you see, here there seems to be a quite significant dip, and then our sales kind of recovers. How do we now combine the promo with the macroeconomic effects? Well, this type of baseline sales, this is really the macroeconomic effect. So the question here is, how can we better predict where this baseline sales will be going based on the macroeconomic indicators? So we will try to make a forecast for that baseline, let us say for the next 3 to 12 months. Yeah? And if we have made that forecast for the baseline based on the macroeconomic indicators for the next 3 to 12 months, then we will add again what's the promo effect, what's the calendar effect, and what could be trends on specific SKUs. Just mentioned here again that if you look at the baseline data, we smooth it. Why? Well, we don't want to match indicators on the individual small peaks up and down here. We really want to match indicators to the longer term economic trends or the longer economic cycles. That's what we are looking for. So that's what why we smooth it for. Yeah. And then we do the leading indicator forecasting. And how does that leading indicator forecasting work? Well, we explained that in more detail in our first webinar, which we gave, I think, 4 to 5 weeks ago. We still have a recording of that webinar available. So if you want to know more really about that macroeconomic forecasting or macroeconomic leading indicator forecasting, we certainly can also refer you to that one. Yeah. But if you look over here, so the original sales, this is now of course looking in more detail. It's a bit magnified for the last year. So this is the baseline sales. Yeah. And the blue curve over here is the smoothed. So the smoothing is what we try to match. Yeah. And then the model fit here, the red line is the result of a macroeconomic leading indicator forecasting. That's one. Yeah. What is the indicator that was identified as providing the best forecast for this product group? It was an indicator called here imports for prepared foodstuff, beverages and tobacco. It was leading by 4 months. Yeah? So by looking at the imports for prepared foodstuffs, beverages and tobacco, we are able to predict where our sales is going to go, let us say in 4 months. Yeah? So the data for October, we have that currently available for this indicator. It means we can use that indicator to forecast the months of November to February. So certainly for the beginning of next year, this indicator will help us to, let's say, be more certain where this specific product group will be going. Yeah? The product group we are looking at is in fact beverages. So it's a kind of juices. And okay, we didn't select the indicator. It's the statistical algorithm which looks at different types of indicators, different type of, let's say, statistical testing, and which came up with this specific indicator. Yeah? The indicator which is selected will of course depend on the type of product, also the region we're selling into, but all of that is basically run by that leading indicator algorithm. So if we make a forecast, we will first make that now on the aggregated level. That's the macroeconomic forecast, you could say. Of course, if we want to add the promos and the calendar effects, we will again do that on the customer SKU level, because that's certainly where we run the promos. So we will disaggregate the data in two ways. We need to disaggregate it from a product group to a customer SKU level. And the second element is we need to disaggregate it from monthly periods into weekly periods, because the promos, we run it in weeks, and the macroeconomic indicators, we run it on monthly basis. So if we do so, this is an example of the result. So this is all history. This is again now customer SKU level data. So this is now the macroeconomic forecast. So the indicator tells us, like, okay, the first 3 months will be at this level, then you will see a drop. So that's what the macroeconomic effect is. This is not, let us say, shocking, but this data is from Western Europe. We are currently running, let us say, analysis for Russia. We are running data experiments specifically for the UK. So it's clear that if you look at Russia, things like the ruble crisis, if you look at the UK, things like the Brexit really give a shock to the consumer confidence. If you have a shock in the consumer confidence, you really need that macroeconomic forecasting to be able to better predict the underlying macroeconomic trend. So it's not too shocking here, but I hope you all get the principle. And of course, if you look at countries or regions where there is more turbulence, that macroeconomic effect will be stronger compared to the one which we show. But the basic idea is that, okay, you get a macroeconomic forecast, and then we can add again effects. We can add the trend. So remember that for this specific customer SKU combination, there was a declining trend. Also remember that the overall trend was increasing. It's like, okay, maybe this is a big pack, and bigger types of packaging might be reduced, and consumers might prefer smaller types of packaging and sizes, right? So it's also important on the SKU level to incorporate the trend. Well, this has a declining trend, so you will also see that this type of macroeconomic forecast is adjusted downwards based on the trend of that specific customer SKU combination. Then I can add the month and the week in the month. So, well, if we look at the next few months, so this will be December and this will then be January. So based on the months and the week of the months, we can add, say, extra information. We can add specific public holidays. So we know that Christmas, if there would be no Christmas, sales would be somewhere over here. But because there is Christmas, we will have a huge peak in the sales. And then we can also add a promotion. So what we did here is we just copied the promotional activity of the last year, just to give an example. So this would be the sales without any promotional activities. This is where our sales will be because of promotional activities. So again, if I scroll to this example, so remember that we said, well, this is the macroeconomic effect. You could even say, well, it's relatively constant. There will be a small shift in the level, but no big surprises or no big changes here. Again, if you run an example for the UK or for Russia or for other regions where there's more economic turbulence, a macroeconomic forecast could be drastically different. So this is the baseline. We add the trend for the specific customer SKU. Then we add the month of the year and the week in the month. Then we add a holiday, the public holiday, and then we can add the promo. So this is where our forecast actually ends up. And basically it's like, quickly in forecast, we also talk about decomposition. So there are different drivers which are, let's say, working towards a certain demand pattern. Well, what we've basically shown here is how different demand drivers are combined and result in this type of forecast. That's what we've done here. So for people who would be interested to know more or to the typical approach we take when we talk to customers, we start with what we call a leading indicator scan. So basically we take a data set of your company and we look at 1 or 2 or 3 product groups. Okay, if we need to combine the promo information and the macroeconomic effects, well, we clearly need customer SKU level data. We need to get a promo history if you have that available. We will need to discuss with you some data cleaning, because if we run the analysis like we've shown here, we might assume that, or the data cleaning might tell us that there are some missed promos in your promo history. We can, and let us say, make the difference between what is the baseline sales, what is the promo and calendar effect. Then find relevant leading indicators for that baseline sales and show you, let us say, how that type of decomposition approach would work for your situation. Yeah? And we typically first start with a scan where we try to reveal, okay, for your data, what type of indicators pops out, and by how far do we think that this type of forecasting approach can improve both your existing forecast and can improve over, let us say, the current best practice forecasting technique. So that's what we do in a leading indicator scan. If we've run such a scan, typically that reveals the improvement potential. The next step is to run a pilot where for a couple of weeks or months, well, each week or each month, we run a forecast for you offline. We compare our forecast with your existing in-company forecast, and over a certain period, let's say anywhere between 6 weeks and 6 months, we also try to follow specific indicators and see whether the underlying trends are better predicted indeed and based on which indicators. So that's a kind of a validation period we take before we then actually to operational use. And operational use means that either on a weekly or a monthly period, we receive our latest sales history. We load that into the tool and we publish back to you a forecast where we can, as we've shown here, a kind of a decomposition which shows the contribution of the different effects and helps you to improve your week by week or month by month operational forecast. That's the typical path we go through with our customers. If you would like to have more information, don't hesitate reaching out to us. We're of course most happy to discuss that in more detail with any of you. Okay, also stay tuned. So as we have shown the link with promos and macroeconomic indicators in this webinar, next webinar in January will also combine weather information into that, and I hope by then that you will understand that, okay, basically it's not too important which type of information it is. So even if it would be social media type of information, in the end we believe that any type of information can be important to explain variance in your sales pattern, and can then be used to improve your forecast accuracy. And again, we also believe that that's where the field of forecasting is switching to. So it will not just be about who has the best technique, but we truly believe that in the future forecasting will be about who has the best information and who is able to link that information to his or her sales data. That's what we truly believe. So thank you for joining us. Also feel free to check our website, which is leadingindicatorforecasting.com. Thank you for participating, and we will make available the recording and the presentation shortly after this webinar. So thank you, and hope to see you back in the next webinar.